Hi, everyone. I'm Henry Emmons, and welcome to week 6 of our Natural Mental Health Online Resilience Retreat.
I'm Tim Colbert.
And I'm Amy Prasek.
And we have a special guest tonight, Catherine Duncan. Catherine is an integrative spiritual consultant, a colleague of mine, and Partners in Resilience, and she has a private practice, Learning to Live. She's an ordained minister, chaplain, spiritual director, and trained in a range of healing modalities. Catherine has been providing the guided meditations as part of the Resilience Retreat weekly practice, so check those out too. So we're going to dive right in. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. We want to make good use of our time with Catherine. So tonight we're going to be talking kind of as a follow-up to last week when we introduced the topic of difficult emotions. And tonight we're talking about perhaps one of the most difficult emotions and also the most common, which is grief. I want to start us off tonight by sharing an old Buddhist teaching story that I think is lovely and has quite a bit to say about grief. So this is a story about one of the Buddha's earliest disciples, a young woman, whose name was Kisa Gautami. As the story goes, she had a young son who died of some sort of infectious illness probably, which happened to so many families, not so very long ago. And she was absolutely bereft by this loss. So she had heard about this great spiritual being, a great teacher that was called the Buddha, and she felt sure that if he wanted to, he would be able to raise her son and give her son back to her. So she went to him, told him about her situation, pleaded with him, please, I beg you, will you bring my son back to me? And the Buddha thought about it for a bit, and then he agreed. He said, yes, I will do that for you. But first, I want you to bring me a little mustard seed from a home that has known no loss. So she ran off. She was so excited, so happy and grateful. She was sure she would be able to do this because mustard seed is one of the most common herbs back in that day, would not be hard to find. She knew she could find a house that had not known any loss. So she went to the first one, and the woman answered the door, heard her plea, and said, I'm sorry. We just lost our grandfather this year. Went to the next house, told the same story, and the person who answered that door said, oh, I'm so sorry, I wish we could help you, but my sister died. The next house, again, someone died, and on and on. And so after doing this for long enough, she realized the truth of this, which is that there is no place, there is no one who hasn't had some loss. And it was apparently for her a great awakening and a great moment of acceptance. And so she became one of the Buddha's most devout and ardent followers. So this is, I think, really the meaning of the first noble truth, which is the universality of suffering. And really this plays out very strongly when it comes to grief and loss. There is no one exempt from this. It's simply part of the human condition. Now, when we were planning this series a few weeks ago, this is almost 2 months ago now, and this is really early in the coronavirus, and we were hearing all kinds of really very, very worrisome projections, and they're still out there. But we were quite sure that by this point in our series, the numbers of losses and numbers of people dying would be so great that this would be a really important topic. As it turns out, that has happened in some parts of the country, but it certainly has not happened everywhere. And so that kind of grief, that raw loss of a loved one, it's happening, but maybe not as widely as we feared, at least not yet. But as we reflected on it, we realized that there's actually a lot of other losses with this. There are things that we would never have imagined. We didn't think about this really 2 months ago. But the loss of our innocence, so to speak, that the idea that this kind of thing could never happen to us or never happen here. The loss of simply being able to see and hug our loved ones and be with our friends and family. For some people, there's a loss of job or economic security, or simply not being able to go out and do the things that we love, missing things like sports and concerts and all those lovely restaurants that we used to go to without even thinking about. And so, Catherine, I wonder if you can talk with us a bit about the range of losses that we're experiencing collectively right now.
Thank you, Henry and Tim, for having me join you tonight, talking about grief and loss and resiliency. I'm going to talk about grief, the many forms of loss we're experiencing right now. We'll have some time for questions at the end, so I'm just going to dive right in. And we are all experiencing some form of loss right now. A loss of safety, our sense of survival has changed. Routines have changed, and I would say many of us have lived in a grace time period for much of our life, where we've never had to live through a crisis like this. What was normal for us has turned upside down. Some of us, as Henry just mentioned, some of us may have lost a job. Some of us may have lost a loved one. Some of us may be struggling financially, like, how am I going to pay rent this month? A loss of just connection with our loved ones and our friends and our colleagues. I think about just getting groceries. I don't know if you're having groceries delivered to your home, if you're going to get groceries, if you're getting takeout or takeout delivered, if you have to pick up prescription drugs at the drugstore, prescriptions. You can feel that it's dangerous. We know the virus is out there, but we don't know. Is it on the packaging? Is it people? Is it a person? This is a kind of loss, what we would call ambiguous loss. It's a loss of control of our life right now. And I just want to say, we're all in this together. We're being called to find new ways of connecting with our family and our friends and our colleagues. And really learning on a whole nother level how to build our inner strength and resiliency. There are many forms of grief. There's what's called anticipatory grief. There's complicated grief. There's disenfranchised grief, traumatic grief, ambiguous loss, to name a few. I would venture to say that tonight, people on this call, most of us are probably feeling this ambiguous loss. We're dealing with this unknown virus that can't be right now fixed. We can't clarify what it is. It's a loss of, control, as well as anticipatory grief. You typically, I think of anticipatory grief if you may have a loved one who is at the end stage of their life and, maybe they're in hospice, they're days or weeks from passing away. You start to have what's called anticipatory grief, where you start anticipating that the death is coming. And we are right now, I think, experiencing anticipatory grief I think of it as, when is this going to end? When are we going to see our friends again, our family that we're not seeing, our colleagues? I also think there's a loss of, activities. I think of sports. My family, my husband's center, huge baseball fans. Just loss of sports is huge. Loss of celebration, graduations, weddings, really important turning points in people's lives, dinners. So there is a lot of different loss happening right now. And I think it's important to also recognize and be okay with it. It might be hard to pinpoint what exactly you're feeling right now in this time of uncertainty.
Well, one of the phenomena that I think is occurring at this time is that all of us are learning a lot of new things. I mean, this has kind of forced us into that. And one of the great sources for that learning is is that there are some experts that have been working with this kind of thing and studying it their whole lives. And so you certainly see that with the medical experts, especially public health people and infectious disease people. But there's also, some really thoughtful writers and speakers on grief. And I wonder, Catherine, if you're in kind of on top of that or monitoring that, what are the national experts saying?
Yeah, there's a lot out there right now. Many experts in the grief field, including one of my favorite, David Kessler. He worked closely with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and wrote the book on grief and grieving. He's saying right now, and it rings true for me, that we're feeling several types of losses at the same time right now. This rings true for me. We had a death in our extended family this last month in a nursing home, Bob, and it was not of COVID. He passed away, though, in a nursing home. I'm noticing some anticipatory grief of, when is this going to end? Some ambiguous loss of just the unknown nature of this. And then on top of it, my husband has a rare heart condition. He has a compromised immune system. And so everything is heightened right now for him and in our family. So, I just want to recognize that multiple losses only add to this heaviness of grief we may be experiencing right now. The classic Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in the field, she's, over the years, she stated, there's 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And it used to be thought that you move sequentially through these stages, but now we know that you don't. You kind of come in and out and back and forth through these stages. And it's really interesting. David Kessler, with the approval and the blessing of the Kubler-Ross family, he's added a 6th stage called meaning making, just finding meaning. How do we find meaning in our loss? And I think this is really important right now and helps me to think about, how are we making sense of this? And, meaning making, it can be sharing, really transparently sharing with one another. Maybe it's through doing some art or poetry, or just how are you making sense of right now? I'm reminded of, that I've thought of this several times, Viktor Frankl, his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, and how he survived the concentration camp by making meaning. He found a way within himself to make meaning, to survive, and he survived, which is huge and powerful story. So I just invite you to think about, how can you find meaning right now in your life? How can you accept what's happening right now? Just one day at a time. Even focusing on small little things that can help you feel empowered. Like, for example, having a daily plan, for the day, this is what I'm going to do today. It might change, but this gives me some sense of control. Even wearing a mask out, wearing gloves, social distancing with your family, your friends. There's so many ways we can connect with one another: through text, through email, through virtual calls, Zoom. It's pretty amazing. I'll share with you, I'm in a Buddhist sitting group, and we meet monthly. Well, we're not meeting now because we're doing Zoom calls. There's 8 of us. And the last call, it was a lovely practice we did. For the first minute, 2 minutes, we intentionally were silent, and we just looked at each person very carefully and really took in their essence on the computer screen. And it just was nice, and it just felt heartfelt. Even though we couldn't be together, we were acknowledging each other's presence very deeply, and that was very moving. So I would just, invite you to think about what's life-giving and choosing that each day.
Thank you. That's really beautiful. So for me, and I think for a lot of people right now, this is feeling so big, so hard to get our hands around and to know what to do in the face of this. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just what are some of the things you think people can do right now simply to take care of themselves, or to take care of their heart, so to speak?
It comes to mind to me as just balance. How can you find a sense of balance each day, nurturing your heart, your soul, your body, mind, spirit? The word mindfulness comes to me, cultivating being in just this moment. Our bodies are always in the present moment. So can we just come back into this moment and into, our breath? And it's a practice. This means stepping back from, they call it your monkey mind, your busy mind, where it's so easy to get caught up in fixating on past worries, fears, what ifs, the future. So just being here now in this moment. And when we let go of our worries of the past, the future, just come into our breath and in our body, we're fully alive. It's in this one moment right now in our breath. And with that, I'd also say, can you feel your feelings? And this takes strength and courage, especially if you're feeling difficult, heavy feelings, which would be normal right now. So when I work with people, one of the first things I share is, awareness, where are you? Can you tune in? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Can you name the thought that's happening right now with you? So maybe you notice, gosh, I'm ruminating, I'm worrying, I'm having some fear. So a thought, here's an example. I'm overwhelmed. When is this gonna end? There's power in just naming what that thought is. Then can you really tune into what you're feeling, which is not easy, not always identifiable, but can you notice, I'm feeling kind of sad, I'm feeling kind of anxious, I'm feeling, whatever that thought is, and just feel the feeling. Feelings are not permanent, and when we feel them, they move through us and dissipate, and then there's room for love, light, peace to come in. And when we truly feel our feelings, they start to move. We start to move from what's that stress response to the relaxation response, and we can learn to just start self-regulating. And then I would say choosing a new thought, a new positive thought. So here's an example. In this moment, I'm okay. I'm strong, I'm resilient. And say that thought several times in your mind or out loud. And then the next step, I think that's really powerful, is choosing a positive memory, one where you felt really good, and remembering all the sensations around it. So here's an example. My family, we haven't been together, my immediate family with my children, since February. I have a daughter out of town. And in February, we had a dinner one night, and we were by a fire, we were eating Indian food, we were enjoying the food, we were laughing, having fun. My heart felt so full. And I just go to that memory, it feels so good. So I think that's just a really powerful experience of taking that in, and what it's doing in the moment is creating strong, healthy neural pathways in your brain that will then dissipate some of those negative, ruminating, fearful thoughts. And I also just want to say that it's normal to have a range of feelings right now. I kind of like to think of it as riding the waves. So I think of it we're this still water, and there might be a ripple, there might be a wave, but then you come back into this place of stillness and just tuning in. So an example of this is my 23-year-old daughter lives in Miami. She's not come home yet because of my husband's health condition, hopefully soon, but I miss her. And I noticed, this has happened a few times for me in quarantine, where I've noticed just a little bit of unrest. And I did this last week. And I just thought, okay, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna do some breathing, meditating, prayer. And I did. And all of a sudden I tuned into feeling, it was sadness. I felt some sadness, missing my daughter and missing my 92-year-old mother, and I just let the feeling come. I had some tears in my eyes, and I just was with that. And then the energy moved, it shifted, and it was just all of a sudden there was a little bit of space and ease and stillness. It was just like, I just felt better because I really just took time to feel those feelings and they moved through me. So I just would invite you, give you permission to just be, let come up what needs to come up. And that said, I just also want to say that, you know, if you've had a traumatic loss, if you've lost someone, if something, you know, really difficult's really happened, you know, yes, feel the feelings, but you can take a break, go for a walk, maybe go watch a movie, call a friend, because this process of grief, it's a process. And just to be really kind and loving and nurturing to yourself.
You know, Catherine, I've been thinking lately about people who have lost or are about to lose someone right now. And remembering when I lost my parents and a sibling and, you know, another loved one, I had a series of losses over a period of just a few years, and it was really hard, a hard time for me. And I think back to that and think about how hard it would have been, how much harder if I hadn't been able to do the public grieving, the rituals, you know, the coming together, sharing stories and all of that. And I've got a number of friends and others that I know of who have aging parents in a nursing home or someone who's in hospice and they can't visit them. And I think it's just heartbreaking when your loved one is about to die and you can't really be with them, at least not in the same way. And so I wonder, this is a hard question, but in the few minutes we have left, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how people might approach this, you know, this kind of loss of our usual rituals and collective mourning. What can we do to try to normalize that and free ourselves up, even though we don't have the chance to do it with others?
Yeah, I would say this is difficult, challenging. Typically, you know, if a loved one passes, there's a funeral, there's a memorial service, there's a gathering where we're together physically and supporting each other. That's where people get a lot of closure. So, you know, I would say right now we're being called to adapt. Typical ways of getting closure, it's not happening. So what are new ways that we can connect to find meaning? As I mentioned, we lost a member of our extended family in a nursing home this last month, and I helped lead a memorial service, a virtual Zoom memorial service with about 15 family members across the United States. And it was so meaningful. Every single person on that Zoom call shared a story, a poem, a remembrance of Bob. You know, he was this incredible man and professor, just this lovely man. And it was so heartfelt. It was beautiful. I mean, I think everyone felt just a deep connection, even though we weren't in person. So at another time, hopefully the family will all gather. But I think it's about creating new rituals and how we connect and, you know, find ways to support each other. And I would just say, you know, tuning in overall to just what do you need to help you? What can fill your heart and soul and nurture you? Is it exercise, yoga, breathing, meditation, body movement, art? I mean, there's just so many ways. I would just invite you to really think about how to nurture your heart and soul. I'd also highly recommend limiting your news intake. I think, and I am an energy healer. I work closely with energy, and I think you just turn on the TV and you get all of a sudden a blast of that energy, and there's a lot of fear and unrest. I'm getting my news on my phone, on apps where I carefully control and get the key headlines. But I highly recommend. I have too many people I work with that have a lot of unrest by watching news, you know, and just focusing on what can nurture your heart and soul. And the other piece is just deeply loving yourself, nurturing and loving yourself. What gives me some comfort right now, I'll just share, is that, and I know Henry has mentioned this, you know, how we live in a state of impermanence. Our mind's always changing, our body's always changing, but that essence behind our mind, I call it pure essence, pure luminosity, that oneness is unchanging. You know, for me, I name it as oneness with God, the universe. You might name it as oneness with God. It's just essence, true nature, whatever that is. But how can you tap into that to find that strength, that stillness, that peace in your heart and soul? So I would love to, we have a few minutes left. I'd love to lead you in one of my absolute favorite breathing exercises. And what it is, I do this every day. It's breathing in. I'm gonna lead you in it for a couple minutes. You're breathing in love and light coming through your body, and breathing out any fear, any unrest. So if you're willing, how about we'll do this for like 2 minutes. So I invite you just to sit comfortably. Feel the weight of your body against the chair. Let your body just soften and relax. Now focusing on your breath, your in-breath, your out-breath. Breathing in and breathing out. And now on your in-breath, I want you to imagine love and light coming through the top of your head, down through your head, your neck, your chest, your abdomen, down through your hips, your legs and knees, and out through your feet, breathing out any fear, any unrest. So again, you're going to be breathing in love and light coming through your whole body, breathing out any fear, any unrest. If your mind wanders, it's okay, just come back. Breathing in love and light, flooding your body, breathing out any fear, any unrest. And we will do this for a couple minutes. I'll let you know. We'll begin. So that was just a couple minutes, but that's one exercise of just coming into our body, our breath, calming our body breath. If you could do that, or a deep belly breathing, just do a breathing exercise for a few minutes in the morning, during the day, at night. We'll just start to calm your body, lower your blood pressure, your heart rate, your cortisol level. And one other comment to share that I'm doing every day, I think it's really powerful, is I breathe in that love coming through my body, and then I breathe it around, this love and light around my body, and then I breathe the love and light through my husband and around him and around our house. And then I do this with my children that are not with us. I breathe, I see the love and light flooding through them and around them and their partners and their apartments. And it just is very comforting. So.
Catherine, thank you so much. That was lovely. And thanks again for your comments and for being a guest and leading those meditations, those weekly meditations. So, Tim, what have you got for the parents and kids this week?
Sure. Well, just a thank you, Catherine, as well. That was really excellent. And, you know, it makes me think of the children that I see. So I have made the change over to telehealth, and, you know, I've been seeing kids really virtually every day, at least 4 days a week, for about 4 or 5 weeks now. And I have seen this transition, if you will, from maybe a lot more in the way of stress and anxiety early on in the coronavirus pandemic to what I'm seeing now is I would describe as Catherine referenced, the stage of really sadness for many of the kids I'm seeing. And it's not that all of them or even any of them have actually had a friend or a relative or someone that they know die, but it really is sadness over these multiple layers of disappointment. They have felt like they've had so many things taken away from them in terms of, favorite activities, celebrations, social connections, et cetera. And I think it's really interesting to me that, more than anything, I'm feeling this sense of despair from them, and irritability. And there certainly are children as well that have experienced loss in their immediate family from the coronavirus. And so just a couple of comments and resources that I will share with the parents out there about children and grieving. I think one is that for the kids that have more irritability and sadness, I saw a little 10-year-old boy today with, ADHD, and he's never had any trouble in his life really with depression or anxiety. It's really, I'm seeing him more for the attention-related issues, but I was struck by how down he was today. I mean, I commented on he was so low energy, so sad, and I think just so kind of bored in a sense that he wasn't feeling very stimulated. So, it's just good to identify these levels of kind of grief, loss, and also disappointment and decide, what the best intervention is. For this young man, I think that what was happening, he was also spending a lot of time on video games or video related devices all day long. He was disconnecting socially and was not getting any exercise. So I think it's clear that we have to find the right fit of an intervention for the given situation. So in his case, it wasn't about adding a medication or even sending him to psychotherapy immediately. It was finding some lifestyle practices and new connections that would really help him. For the younger kids, by the way, I have to say this, I found a lovely new book that I'd recommend to everyone with a younger child between the ages of 5 and 7 who have a lot of irritability and are just feeling crabby because of these disappointments. It's called A Grumpy Monkey. I'll show it to you guys here. But take a look at that one by Suzanne Lang. It's all about a young chimpanzee that is having a grumpy day. And the point of the book is that people try to get him to do all these different things to help him to feel better. But you know what? In the end, he just needed to be left alone for one day and allowed to be grumpy. And so maybe there's a good message in there as well. We can kind of let people be sometime and feel what they're feeling, as Catherine referenced as well. I think the other thing is we do have to deal with kids that have experienced death in the family, and that is something that has happened to a few of the families that I have met with over the last few weeks. And we have to recall that kids oftentimes express grief more through behavior than through words. And it's also quite dependent on their developmental stage. And so just recall that in the younger kids, ages 4 to 6, the preschool age, we must remember that they oftentimes will engage in magical thinking. And so they can think very inaccurate things about death in the family. And they might even perceive, for example, that they did something to cause a person's death. So I think it's important to remember that and make sure that we talk to them in ways that are very clear and brief and simple. I think it's important for the younger kids as well not to use euphemisms because they get confused by those sayings like so-and-so passed away, or we lost him, or and so-and-so went to heaven. I think it's better to say things like grandpa or grandma's body stopped working, things that are really brief and really simple. So I think just to remember a few things like that for the younger kids. And also recall that oftentimes they will express their discomfort, if you will, and grief in physical ways, like they'll change in their eating habits or change in their sleeping habits, or more commonly, they'll even behaviorally regress. So you might see a kiddo that in the past had been dry at night, maybe they start wetting the bed. Or maybe a child that was sucking their thumb years ago, but they had gotten rid of that habit, now it comes back to them. So just be aware that some of these things are going to be different for the younger kids. In terms of elementary school age kids, ages 7 to 12 or so, it's important to remember that they most commonly learn how to grieve or kind of learn their grief response or mourning behaviors by observing others. And so they really take their cues from their parents and from others that they see grieving. And so they are at an age where they can understand that death is irreversible. But interestingly, they also get, different ideas about the mechanisms of death. And so they might think, for example, that if they get an illness or an injury, that they could die. And so I think it's important to address those kinds of fears as well. In that age group, we might see them acting out in terms of refusal behaviors, being just crabby in general, as I mentioned, but we might also see them withdrawing from friends or even having school difficulties. So just a few, I think, tips to think about. For that age group, I also very much like a book which I strongly recommend called When Someone Very Special Dies. It's by Marge Heegard. But what I love about it is it gives kids a chance to write down, for example, stories about a loved one that might have died, engage in some art type therapy activities. And it's really a creative and engaging way for kids to kind of play through and process emotions related to death and dying. So you'll see that we have some other resources listed on the website for parents and for kids, but just a few things to get you started. All right, I think we have time for questions.
Thank you, Tim. So Tim, I learned something from you tonight. The next time you're grumpy, I'm going to leave you alone for a day.
That never happens, does it?
So here's a question that someone just sent our way. Any tips for those of us with parents with dementia? My mom doesn't understand why we aren't visiting anymore. We try to explain, but it doesn't stay with her. I feel grief and so confused. And I bet you also feel some frustration that there just isn't more that you can do. There's not really a very satisfying answer to that because we're all so limited in what we can do as far as visiting, touching, hugging, being with people we love like this. And that's what would probably really be helpful. So I would say in lieu of that, I think people with dementia respond best to a couple of things that don't involve, being physical presence and touch. One of those is repetition, and another is music. And so I think if you maybe identify some of their favorite music, especially from when they were younger, that's the music that tends to stay with all of us, the teens and 20s, and maybe make a playlist and I think also maybe record your voice and see if there's someone of the caretakers who could just every now and again play your voice or play the playlist for them. And your voice, you can say whatever you think they'd like to hear, just remembering that just hearing it over and over again would probably be really soothing and comforting, and at least they will probably recognize your voice. They may even recognize voices for a longer period of time than they do our faces. So I think there could be some a real gift in that. Here's a question for Tim. I'll just go ahead and read it. I'm grieving childcare. Seriously, I'm feeling unequipped and frazzled, often yelling. How can I stay calm and feel more confident? My kids are 2 and 5.
Well, that's a tall order, and you guys can jump in here too. But the first thing I think about, and I've seen many families in this exact situation, and the parents are really having a hard time. And they're both at home working, for example, trying to get their kids through the online schooling every morning, taking turns with that, and then not to mention entertaining them and or cooking dinner and getting the other chores done. So I think a couple things come to mind. The first thing is this, that I think in this situation, we all have to give up this perception of perfection in terms of parenting. I think we have to allow ourselves a couple of things. Number one, I think kids can see you being frustrated and angry and, occasionally losing your cool, and that's okay. I think number two, of course, you have to find ways, even in the briefest of moments, to do breathing exercises and take a break. And as Henry referenced, even listen to a quick musical selection or, do a couple of jumping jacks. I think aromatherapy is a great option for people in a tough situation like this, where you can get a diffuser, diffuse some lavender or sweet orange into your room for a couple hours. Everybody's going to feel calmer. But I think one of the main things is to understand that you might not hit all the goals that you've established for yourself and your kids during this time, but know that you can at least enjoy the special time that you're getting to spend with the kids, even though they're irritating and driving you nuts. It really is a special opportunity. I think, do your best to be patient with yourself and your kids, and just give yourself a break. And if you need to, suspend the rules with your kids a little bit and take the path of least resistance when you need to.
Thank you. I love that question, by the way, and I can really imagine that might be tough. So here's a question. I think this would be a good one for you, Catherine, to say something about, and then maybe Tim and I can chime in. I cycle between grief, deep sadness, followed by anger, and then fearful, then back again to grief, like in 5 minutes. Is there a practice that is good for these emotional surges?
I would say, how can you just bring some calmness and peace into your heart and to your soul? Just to breathe, to take a few minutes to calm and relax. One of my favorite practices that I do regularly, it's called self-soothing. You just put your hands over your heart area. Hopefully you can see, over your heart area. And you just take a few deep breaths. You just breathe. Our body always responds to physical touch, and we'll just naturally start to soften and calm and relax. And then you could say, a loving kindness phrase, may I be at peace. Or, give me peace. Just see peace coming through your body, and just breathe and relax and calm. And this is a practice that I do regularly. It's really comforting and will help just calm and soothe my body. So that's one thought.
So, that question about really being overcome by these very strong emotional swings is a great segue to next week, because next week we're talking about emotional storms and how to find refuge in those, which is really how do we create more emotional steadiness when our emotions are all over the map like this. So please come back, tune in with us for next week. We're going to have another great guest, Dr. Jennifer Fallon, who's a wonderful psychologist I work with here in the cities. And so we'll go deeper into that very question next week. So thank you again, Catherine, for being with us. And thanks, Tim and Amy, and all of you for tuning in. And we really hope to see you next week. Please remember to check out Catherine's meditations and all the other great stuff that we have going on in the days in between these Wednesday evenings. So thank you, everyone.